Wheels of Justice. Accessibility and accessing justice for persons with disabilities in Valenzuela City. Introduction. The Wheels of Justice project aimed to address the gap between violations of inaccessibility for persons with disabilities and their pursuit of legal justice to dismantle them by utilizing a whole-of-society approach. By engaging civil society as well as the public and private sectors, the initiative sought to address the historically low number of accessibility-related claims despite existing legal provisions. The Philippines has a significant population of persons with disabilities, with 8.7% of the population, or approximately 8.5 million individuals experiencing functional difficulties. In Valenzuela City, persons with disabilities make up around 3.3% of the population. The Philippine government, as primary duty bearers, has adopted legal frameworks to protect the rights of persons with disabilities, including the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD, which mandates the elimination of barriers to accessibility under Article 9. The obligations are further clarified in General Comment Number 2, which emphasizes the importance of accessibility as a precondition to equal participation in society. Whilst national laws such as the Philippine Magna Carta for Persons with Disability, Republic Act No. 7277, with its subsequent amendments, set the foundation for disability rights, whereas the Accessibility Law, PB 344, and the 2024 Revised Implementing Rules and Regulations, along with legislation like the Filipino Sign Language Act, RA 11106, amongst other memorandums, for example, Department of Information and Communications Technology, number 2017004, establish accessibility standards for public spaces, transportation, and information and communication services, ICS. On the other hand, CRPD Article 13 mandates state parties to ensure effective access to justice for persons with disabilities through the provision of procedural and age-appropriate accommodations and training for those administering justice. The Philippine Development Plan, PDP 2023 to 2028, emphasizes strengthening a stable and accountable justice system, including provisions for strengthening inclusivity for legal assistance for vulnerable groups like persons with disabilities. However, despite these legal protections, persons with disabilities continue to face barriers that restrict mobility, limit access to essential services, and impact overall quality of life. Simultaneously, a myriad of barriers remain present, creating disparities for persons with disabilities to access justice. Accessibility is broadly understood as the ability to access services, products, and environments without barriers. It is a fundamental precondition for persons with disabilities to participate fully and equally in society, ensuring the realization of human rights across civil, political, economic, and socio-cultural spheres. Nevertheless, public infrastructure remains largely inaccessible as audits are irregular and penalties for non-compliance are not enforced properly. This was highlighted during the viral 2024 Metropolitan Manila Development Authority (MMDA) scandal, where a steeply angled ramp became a symbol of systemic failures in urban planning. Transportation presents another significant barrier. No city or provincial buses have wheelchair lifts. PRPD 2013. Meanwhile, 80% of the 46 train stations in Manila are not fully accessible to persons with disabilities. Ranada 2023. Moreover, the use of private cars is prioritized over improving public transportation. In addition, the poorest accessibility conditions are seen in lower-income communities, which frequently have larger populations of persons with disabilities. The lack of accessible walkways and transport choices disproportionately impacts persons with disabilities, limiting their ability to participate in society by default. Efforts to improve accessibility are further complicated by cultural considerations. An example of this is the Philippines' Jeepney Modernization Program, where investment in accessibility is often sidelined due to cost concerns and the prioritization of cultural preservation, despite these cultural practices creating barriers for persons with disabilities. Accessibility initiatives are also made more difficult by political factors. For instance, persons with disabilities have fewer transportation alternatives because infrastructure investment places more emphasis on cost-effectiveness and aesthetics than on universal design. Methods. This research aimed to explore the perceptions of persons with disabilities on the accessibility of their environment, with additional comments on their access to justice. A mixed methods research methodology was utilized to capture the diverse experiences. First, quantitative data was collected using surveys that were structured using a Likert scale, allowing respondents to rate their experiences in terms of usability, safety, and affordability. These categories were applied across 3 domains: public infrastructure, transportation, and ICS. Then, qualitative data was collected during focus group discussions, FGDs, with participants selected from the survey. The FGDs provided a space for open discussions where participants shared personal stories that illustrated the systemic barriers they face. The study gathered information from 102 survey respondents, 7 of whom were invited as FGD participants. Purposive sampling was deployed, which made it possible to reach women, persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities, persons of different age groups, persons with disabilities from different barangays, and parents of children or youth with disabilities. The data was examined using basic statistic analysis for quantitative responses and a thematic review for qualitative input to find trends and prioritize areas of concern. Ethical considerations were given importance throughout the study. Guaranteeing respondents' confidentiality, informed consent, and voluntary participation. Results. Significant accessibility issues were found in all 3 key domains: public infrastructure, transportation, and ICS. There were also issues for persons with disabilities in accessing justice. Public infrastructure. The survey results highlight significant accessibility and safety concerns for persons with disabilities in the physical environment. The most accessible locations indicated by responses were their homes, workplaces, and places of worship. Meanwhile, the least accessible were sidewalks, pavements, public restrooms, bars, and clubs. Respondents pointed to safety concerns centered on needing assistance when accessing public spaces. Public restrooms and sidewalks emerged as the most problematic areas with respondents often avoiding them entirely to prevent risks of slipping in public toilets due to missing handrails and uneven, hazardous sidewalks. Respondents also frequently cited discrimination and accessibility barriers that hinder community participation. Other establishments like banks, police stations, and remittance centers were reported as largely unused by respondents, reflecting limited relevance to their daily lives. Transportation. Personal vehicles and tricycles received the highest accessibility scores, while jeepneys and motorcycle vehicles for hire, such as Angkas and Joyride, were rated among the least accessible. Although taxis and Grab, a ride-hailing service provider, were highly rated for usability and safety, affordability remained a significant concern. Multiple respondents relied on more expensive transport options due to accessibility challenges, and some were denied fare discounts. Safety concerns were particularly pronounced with jeepneys, with respondents reporting discrimination, difficulties boarding, and unsafe conditions leading to injuries. Respondents also reported that buses posed challenges. Information and Communication Services, ICS. Electronic sources such as TV programs or news, radio programs or news, and apps were preferred, while traditional sources like printed materials and government websites ranked lower. Notably, many persons with disabilities do not frequently use signages or posters or billboards or government websites, while radio, apps, and TV are most utilized. Usability challenges included difficulties using mobile phones and a lack of sign language in TV programs. Respondents also reported feeling unsafe on social media, particularly Facebook, due to fear of discrimination and online bullying. Accessing justice. Participants reported difficulties in accessing transportation, establishments, and ICS, but rarely faced higher charges or service refusal due to their disability. The majority of the respondents said that they know there is a legal remedy should they experience rights violations in these areas. Most of them also said they are aware of legal frameworks. However, they are more familiar with the Magna Carta for persons with disabilities compared with the accessibility law and the CRPD. Although respondents expressed confidence in understanding their rights, their confidence was lower in terms of knowing where to get information, knowing where to get legal advice from, and knowing where to file complaints. 39% of participants had experienced rights infringements, yet most did not report them due to fear, financial constraints, or lack of knowledge on where to go. Personal testimonies highlighted emotional trauma, institutional distrust, and systemic barriers, with some individuals enduring serious injustices, such as gender-based violence without recourse. Discussion. The findings of the study demonstrate the persistent barriers that persons with disabilities in Valenzuela City face across usability, safety, and affordability in physical environments, transportation, ICS, as well as accessing justice. Despite legal mandates under the CRPD and national laws, significant challenges remain. Key themes that emerged include barriers to mobility and participation, limited access to relevant ICS, and persistent attitudinal discrimination. The lack of accessible transportation and public spaces remain major barriers to mobility and participation for persons with disabilities. In fact, nearly a quarter of respondents rarely or never leave their homes due to physical hazards and lack of support services. Women generally rated usability higher than men across various domains, but disparities in safety perceptions revealed that while women preferred personal transport modes, men felt safer in public transportation. Persistent attitudinal discrimination also affects their access to transportation, with frequent experiences of discrimination and denial of fare discounts. The trade-off between affordability and accessibility forces many into unsafe or costlier transport options, reinforcing systemic exclusion. Without strict regulatory oversight of the accessibility law, infrastructure will continue to fall short of meeting accessibility requirements. Stricter law enforcement must also be put in place to address discrimination by private transport operators, such as overcharging fares or outright refusal of service. Lastly, there seems to be a gap between understanding their rights and accessing justice. While many respondents claim they know their rights and that there are legal remedies should rights violations occur, they do not know where to seek advice and file complaints. Conclusion and recommendations. This study highlights the persistent challenges in accessibility and access to justice faced by persons with disabilities in Valenzuela City. Although legal frameworks like the Magna Carta for Persons with Disabilities and the Accessibility Law offer a strong basis, accessibility issues have arisen due to disparate applications and enforcement practices. Significant disparities across all domains limit the full participation of persons with disabilities in society. Multiple respondents reported being unable to leave their homes due to mobility barriers, safety concerns, and reliance on companions. The inaccessibility of essential infrastructure, such as public toilets and sidewalks, alongside attitudinal discrimination, further compounds these challenges. To close this gap and ensure that all necessary requirements pertaining to basic features like sidewalks, public restrooms, and disaster shelters are followed, frequent audits of the actual status of accessibility for public infrastructure should be conducted. Systems of public transportation need to be gender responsive and accessible for persons with disabilities. Regulations should also be strengthened to prevent fare discrimination and service rejection, and there should be financial incentives to encourage inclusive transportation options. Another part of prioritizing digital accessibility is redesigning government websites and online services to meet accessibility standards. Coordination between legislators, urban planners, transportation companies, and developers of digital services will be necessary to implement these improvements. Valenzuela City can serve as a national leader for equal rights and opportunities for persons with disabilities by recognizing accessibility as an inalienable right. There needs to be rapid incorporation of reforms in all ways possible to build a city that serves all its citizens. The inaccessibility of public infrastructure further limits participation, particularly in civic and recreational spaces, while many persons with disabilities exclude themselves from social activities due to perceived inaccessibility. The lack of Filipino Sign Language interpreters remains a major issue in media and public services, despite legal mandates for accessibility. Additionally, the digital divide persists, with government websites remaining largely inaccessible. attitudinal barriers and discrimination further exacerbate these challenges, with persons with disabilities, especially those with non-apparent disabilities, being denied entitlements or facing disrespectful treatment. Online harassments, particularly on social media, also contributes to exclusion and reinforces broader societal stigma. Finally, despite most of the respondents asserting they know their rights, there was less knowledge about the accessibility law and CRPD. Meanwhile, fear, financial constraints, and lack of knowledge on how to navigate the legal system lead to a low turnout of filing complaints. To address these problems, an integrated approach involving regulatory changes and investing in infrastructure is needed. It is vital that government agencies, private businesses, and advocacy groups such as OPDs join forces in making changes that go beyond compliance and actively promote inclusiveness. It will be vital that persons with disabilities have meaningful participation and the ability to co-create accessible urban spaces. Significant changes involving the integration of universal design concepts into digital services, transportation, and urban planning will empower persons with disabilities to participate in society as completely and independently as possible. Most importantly, persons with disabilities need to be capacitated on their rights to empower them to advocate for accessibility and access to justice, because nothing about them without them.